Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everybody. I think we were waiting for about 6 more. We still got a couple more minutes. All right, I'll give it just another minute or so before we get going. I know it says that Amy Early is the one presenting, but my name is Tara Withrow, and I will actually be your presenter. So just don't get confused. I think there is a section in here where you guys can type questions along the way if you have them, and I will do my best to answer them. Some of them may be answered in the presentation, but we can go over your questions as you have them. I think we'll just go ahead and get going now. We've got 8 of you in here, and so in all honesty, this is my first webinar training, so please be gentle. Usually when I'm interacting and talking with people, it's in person or over the phone, not quite like this, and I get, a conversation going with questions, so this will be a little bit odd for me, but the presentation should be about an hour or so if you guys have, depending on questions you guys might have. So we've called this Untangling the Vocational Web because we know that vocational services in Washington workers' comp can be a little bit confusing and hard to work with. So a little bit about me is I was a vocational counselor out in the private sector, intern and then counselor, total for about 7 years. After doing that, I decided that I would change my focus a little bit, and I went to work at the Department of Labor and Industries, and I was an early return to work vocational services specialist, which is a lot of words for I helped employers and the workers through the claim process, usually early on. So we'll go ahead and get here. So what I would hope that you guys kind of learn through this, and I don't know, everybody's got a little bit different experience with the vocational counselors and the vocational phases and all of that. So I want to give you kind of a high-level overview of what you'll learn and how the vocational services process in Washington impacts you guys and how to best work with the vocational counselors, or at least your examiners who will work with them directly. So we are thinking that this will probably be maybe the introduction into maybe a series of different trainings along the way. So if you want to hear something more about a specific topic, if we go over it, feedback that way is always helpful. But there are a lot of acronyms in the vocational world, and so you may get a call from a vocational counselor and you don't know really what they're talking about. So we'll go over a little bit of that stuff so that you're not so out in the dark. We'll talk about some of the things to do and what not to do scenarios. We'll talk about, kind of the tie-in between the light duty process and qualifying for stay-at-work benefits. And then we just want you to be familiar with really the tools and services available to you and just the process itself. Here are some of the kind of standard acronyms for the voc field. VRC, you'll see that a lot. That is Vocational Rehabilitation Counselor. Ability to work, ATW, that's used a lot in reference to a specific, if we're assessing somebody's ability to work, that's just what it is. You're probably all familiar with activity prescription form. Excuse me. Job of injury, job analysis, that is the document used. The easiest way to think about that is like the goal to get somebody back to after they're injured. It's a very in-depth job description that lists physically what they're required to do in order to return to that job. Light duty is just that. It can be a variety of things, modifying the job that they were injured at, breaking that down and taking away certain tasks or physical demands from that. It can be a completely separate job from what they were doing when they got injured. The light duty job description, that is one of the first parts to beginning the formal light duty process, and I have an example of those in the presentation that we'll be able to look at. RTW, return to work. So that's used a lot, especially in the claim file notes. The claims managers will refer to that a lot, so will the vocational counselors. Stay at work is typically abbreviated SAW or WSAW. Okay, so I'll have a couple things in this presentation about some things that I just want you to think about if you know the answer to, just get your brains moving. So the first thing is, do you really know the role a VRC plays in a claim? And a lot of employers that I have worked with over the years, the answer is no. They may know a little bit of a snippet, maybe specific to what they've been asked for a claim, but they don't really know the overall role and the goal of voc services. So we're going to go over that. So here is a very general overview. The first thing, and this is what I would always tell people when I was a vocational counselor, they are objective third parties, and they are asked to perform a variety of services in a workers' compensation claim. And so especially when I was a vocational counselor, I always felt it was really important that I explained to the workers, I'm not your advocate. I am not your employer's advocate. I'm nobody's advocate. I'm just here to do an assessment. And so when they do that, they're guided by the return to work priorities. And if you haven't heard of those are coming, I think, in the next slide, and we'll go over that a little bit and why that matters to you. They will review the entire claim file. When they get a referral from the department, they'll review the file and see what's going on, and they will kind of be able to pinpoint what's missing, and the goal is to help move a claim forward. But they gather information by talking with all the parties in a claim, the employer, the worker, the medical providers, claims managers, anybody that may be somebody that can provide information, because at the end of their referrals, they submit reports making a recommendation to the department using the information that they have gathered. Sorry. So here are the return to work priorities. And the reason that these are important, and I've split them up into two sections, is because if you'll see on the left side, there are 4 of them. All 4 of those have to do with returning that person back to work with you, the employer. Those are the first goals. That's always the goal of a vocational counselor, is to try to get that person back. And when we talk about the return to work priorities with the workers, that is outlined to them. We always want them to go back. So when we're doing that, we do it typically in the order that they're listed. The return to the previous job with the same employer is ideal. It's the easiest closure to have for everybody. Almost like the way I would explain to workers is like the injury never happened. And so when we can't do that, for whatever reason, if they have permanent restrictions, maybe the employer had to hire that job away because they couldn't hold the position. Well, maybe we can modify the job with the same employer. And that's our second best option. So if we can modify something, so maybe we have somebody that's got a restriction where they used to be able to lift 50 pounds, but they can't any longer do that. They can lift 35. If the employer can modify their regular job and say, okay, from now on, you won't lift anything more than 35 pounds, that is the second best option. The third one is the employer finding a new job for that person, keeping any restrictions in mind, of course. And the last one is modifying a new job. So let's say you moved them, you have somebody that's going to be, you've got a secretary position, let's say, available, but maybe there are some restrictions about how much time that person can type. So then we're looking at modifying that job. Maybe we need to provide a different keyboard or Dragon software. Maybe you just add in different tasks so that they don't have to do that much typing. So things like that, that's what those vocational counselors are really trying to do initially, is anything they can to help you keep this claim cost down by getting somebody back to work. Now, if that is not possible, if you don't bring somebody back, then they look at the box on the right. They will look at transferable skills is the first thing they'll look at. And so when they're looking at transferable skills, you have, it's a long process and they have to go through somebody's work history, and all of that stuff takes time. And of course that equates to money. So when we're looking at these, we're looking at transferable jobs. Can that person take what they've done in the past and apply it to a job can they take that? Sorry. When we're looking at that, we're looking at within their restrictions and limitations, can they go back to something they've already done, is the easiest way to explain that. And if it's not, if the answer is no, that's when we look at possibly retraining. And if the retraining is not an option, that's where the pensions come into. So it all kind of builds on itself, but they use these return to work priorities in every single claim that they get. Let's see. Okay, so we're going to go through the stages of vocational rehabilitation. So the very first one, which is the early return to work program, that is the program that L&I has put together that is designed to help really the employer and the worker with return to work. Typically, it's early on in a claim. Sometimes it's shortly after surgery. Sometimes there are other reasons. Maybe it just didn't get the help. But usually it's fairly early in a claim. The claim can still be undetermined. So sometimes those referrals are made within a couple days of an injury occurring. That typically what happens in that program is the person that is assigned that claim at L&I, the vocational services specialist, they reach out to the employer or the TPA and they work with the worker, and they're helping with the light duty job descriptions. They're helping get that sent off to the doctor to be reviewed. They're educating a lot of the parties in each claim to help make sure that that claim is set up for success. They will offer, in some instances, to help with the job analysis for the job of injuries. They will sometimes, depending on their availability and their qualifications, they may help with ergonomic evaluations. They'll assist with permanent job offers. They'll help with get the employers ready for the stay at work program and the preferred worker, which is similar to the stay at work program. They are expected to be in a claim for roughly 90 days or so, give or take. And what happens in that referral process is if the claims manager asks for that claim to be assigned to early return to work and that person is not able to get your worker back to work, then what will typically happen is they will recommend that that claim be referred out to a private sector vocational counselor for continued services. So while that program is really fantastic in terms of helping if you're an employer who doesn't often offer light duty, that can lead directly to a more costly service, which would be the private sector vocational counselors. So the next phase that happens sometimes is the standalone job analysis. Those are when the private sector vocational counselors are assigned by L&I to prepare just the job of injury job analysis. That may be done over the phone. I always preferred to do them on site if I could, so I could actually see what the person did and ask questions there, but that's not always a possibility to do. They are given 15 days to complete that. So when those referrals are sent out, it is very important that the employers respond to any requests for information, which might include the job description for somebody to start, or even contact to arrange a time to go out there. Because they're only given 15 days to complete them, they have one option to submit, yes, it's complete, or another option, no, it's not complete, and that's it. When these referrals are sent out, they usually are done to help the claims manager make a determination about whether a claim or a condition should be allowed. They'll do it if it's prior to an independent medical examination, or if the worker is going to be starting a work conditioning, work hardening program, or a functional capacities evaluation. They want that document because, like I said, that job of injury, job analysis is kind of like the goal to get somebody back to work. What do they have to be able to do in order to be released back? So once that process is done, they may be referred to early intervention. And keep in mind, the department doesn't have to assign these in order. They can really kind of look at the claim and decide what needs to happen. They don't necessarily have to do all of them, and they can skip steps when it comes to the early return to work, standalone, early intervention, and the next one we'll talk about after is ability to work assessment. So in early intervention, the vocational counselor is assigned with similar goals to the early return to work program, getting that person back to work. What they're focused on is the first 4 return to work priorities that we talked about in the last slide. Those are what they are looking for. So are they able to coordinate that person going back to work in that referral? That is their end goal. That job of injury, job analysis is always prepared if it's not already done in that service. If the vocational counselors are unable to get the information from the employers regarding that job analysis, they will get it from the workers because that information has to come from somewhere. And that can really kind of, reality is that can bite you in the butt because what's happening is they're using what the employer or what the worker says the job is, and they may not be accurate. So they may be telling them that they have to lift 50 pounds 3 hours a day, and maybe they're lifting 40 pounds once a week. So that's one of the reasons it's helpful for you guys as employers to understand what they do, why they do it, and what they really need. So the next slide we'll talk about is the ability to work assessment. And this is kind of the meat and potatoes of the vocational referrals. And the reason is because they can encompass the standalone job analysis, the early return to work, the early intervention, kind of all in one assessment. They can be referred just to do all of that really in one. So this is where they're looking still at trying to get somebody back to work with you, but if they're unable to, then they look at the transferable skills. So they will make a recommendation at the end of their services to L&I about the worker's ability to work or eligibility for further services or pension if they're not released back to their job of injury without restrictions. So, like I said, all the return to work priorities are addressed in this referral. So, return to work with the employer is still the goal. And in all honesty, I think what happens often is the vocational counselors attempt to get a hold of the employers at the beginning of their referrals. But if they don't get a response back, they move on because they assume that means there aren't any return to work options. So it's really important if you get either phone calls directly for them to refer them to your examiner to help deal with them and interact with them. But if you have worked with them in the past, you probably know it's important to respond to them so that they can get the information they need and move on to the next step as quickly as possible. So when we're talking about transferable skills, we're talking about demonstrated skills from the worker's work history and non-work related experience. So that means that what we will probably be asking you for is that person's resume, any job application, or anything like that, because the vocational counselor will need that sometimes to document what they've done in the past. I know for a fact that many times workers are less than honest about what they've done in the past if they are familiar with the vocational process. And as an example, I would have often people that had done fast food work in the past, or even cashiering type experience. And maybe they hadn't done that in a few years, but they knew that if they couldn't go back with the employer to any work, they would be found able to work as a cashier or something like that. And so to avoid that, they wouldn't necessarily tell people what they've done. And if they've done work in another state, you may not be able to get their employment history. It may be more difficult to, substantiate that stuff. So we'll ask you for the job, for the resumes, the applications, anything that you have, cover letters, sometimes references, just to help document what has been done by that person. So it's really important that if you get those requests from they should be coming from your examiner because a vocational counselor has contacted them, to get that information as quickly as you can. The vocational counselors will also help with job modifications and pre-job accommodation assistance. That really kind of is big fancy words for some ergonomic assistance usually. They'll help implement or identify or ask an outside party like a physical therapist or somebody else, depending on their skill and comfort level, for help identifying what job modifications might be needed to be implemented for somebody to return to work. Something as simple as a keyboard, but maybe something as complex as building, a ramp in their workspace so that they can get in and out in a wheelchair, things like that. They will help coordinate. Once a vocational counselor is assigned an ability to work assessment referral, that referral stays open until there is vocational resolution. And that's kind of the term that L&I uses a lot, is their vocational resolution. So that worker must either return to work, be found able to work in gainful employment, which is where we're talking about the transferable skills, be eligible for retraining, or eligible for a pension. And so the claim doesn't close without vocational resolution. If somebody doesn't have transferable skills, and if you are unwilling to bring that person back to work, that's when the vocational counselor will look at the next step. That is plan development. When that ability to work assessment recommendation closes and the department looks at that and says, yes, they'll determine if that person was in fact, if that was the correct recommendation. They will send you a letter, and you have 15 days from that referral date to decide if you really want to not bring that person back, because once that person is 2 weeks into plan development, you no longer have the option to present them a bona fide and valid job offer. And the reason that is important is because plan development and the next service on the next slide, plan implementation, are incredibly expensive. So when we're talking about plan development, we're talking about retraining, either a formal retraining or an on-the-job retraining. So when a vocational counselor gets that referral for plan development saying, yes, there are no other options for this person, usually that referral time is about 60 days in length. That gives them often enough time for that worker to participate in any placement testing, identify the school they want to go to, and the training plan itself. Certificate, sometimes it's an AA, it depends, but gives them, but I've seen them push out for 9 months to a year, which, keep in mind, during all of these services, assuming that person is participating along the way, that is time loss that they're going to be getting. So this is why I want you guys to understand the part of the process, so you know how and when it will impact you. So we're going to move on to the plan implementation spot. So this is where, after plan development, that will close, and the vocational counselor will have put together an incredibly in-depth plan usually. Every single class that person will take quarter by quarter, and what the skills are that person will be expected to come away with. And any certifications, they will compare their skills. It's a lot of work to put that together, which really translates to a lot of dollars. The plan that somebody may choose is up to 24 months of training, which equates, depending on their skills, abilities, and all of that, up to an AA sometimes, or if they have an AA, they could transfer that to a bachelor's. So time loss is paid during plan implementation. So you have 2 additional years after all of the other processes are done that time loss is going to be paying, racking up a lot of money. So when we're talking about the training benefits and how much they get to spend, that is reviewed July 1st every year by L&I. It doesn't go up dramatically each year usually, and sometimes it stays the same, but we'll get to the costs of all that in a second. So when somebody is in plan implementation, they can opt out, which means that even though they are qualified by L&I standards for retraining, they don't want to participate in it, or they just decide they want to go be, a boat captain, and L&I doesn't support that particular training for a variety of reasons. So they can use that retraining money for other training if they want to later on down the road. Maybe they have no interest because of their age, or they plan to move out of the area before their training would be over. So they've got the option to opt out, but they still get to use the funds. And so that they can opt out within 3 months of starting. So they can start a training, and the idea is that really the first quarter, if they decide they maybe chose wrong, they get to opt out. And then they get a vocational award, which is really time loss, equivalent to 9 months if they opt out. The retraining funds are available for them to access for up to 5 years after that claim closes. So the money is still set aside for them, but then the claim will close if they choose that. So here is why these phases of VOC matter to you. The early return to work process, that's free. Now, when you're looking at these amounts, this is strictly the money, except for that $18,000, for exactly what the vocational counselor / their interns can bill on a claim. That doesn't include any medical treatment. That doesn't include any time loss. That is only what they call fee cap. That is their fee cap amount. Now, the free early return to work, that is helpful to a lot of employers because most employers don't have third-party administrators to help them through. So it's a really great resource. The unfortunate part, though, is if you don't get somebody back to work, then they're probably going to have them be referred out to one of these services: standalone job analysis, early intervention, but most likely the ability to work assessment. So when you're looking at this, these could be worst case scenario all stacked on top of each other for you. And this is straight out the door, the billing. Vocational counselors bill, they're on a billable hour. So, and what they'll do is, you'll see that $94.20 per hour, that's per billable hour. And so let's just give you an example. If I were a vocational counselor and I call you as the employer to just touch base with you, see about return to work options, see if you had any questions, concerns, explain the process, and I leave you a message, that is $9.42 right there, because they bill it in 6-minute increments. So what they call it is a 0.1. If I have to follow back up with you because you didn't return my call, that's another 0.1. If I have to talk with you, everything they are doing is generally billable. So an hour's worth of work is $94.20. If they use interns to assist on their claims, it is a little less money, but that is out the door what they get to bill for. And the other part is that in the, which I didn't put in the slide, but in the ability to work assessment phase, the department has now included what they call a fee cap extension, and you can tap into, I believe it's roughly an extra $800 or so in the ability to work assessment phase, if because some claims are really complex and they may need extra work that nobody was anticipating. So there is a special amount of money also set aside for those instances. But that worker gets to spend up to $18,000 basically for their retraining option. So you add all of those together and that's a lot of money. And when you're in a retro program, which you are, that is even bigger money because these are essentially the developed costs for you. So free is free. But when you're looking at developing these out, essentially what you can do is multiply those costs from the last slide by 9, because that is the factor that VOC services are developed out at. So that is, and sorry, I think I messed up and didn't do the 18,000 part out, but you can see that just that standalone job analysis that was $493 before has now cost you $4,400. You know, so these are really, really important things for you guys to know, because this is how it impacts you and this is why. So when you are talking about just putting these, you know, I don't have time to call these people back. I don't have time to address this. I don't want to bring this worker back. This is essentially what will happen to that claim and how that will impact you guys financially. So here's what I want you guys to kind of take away from this, even if we can't stop a referral once it's been made to a vocational counselor. And sometimes we can, but sometimes we can't. The department uses their discretion to refer them out. So once in a while we can get the referral canceled, but I wouldn't hold your breath that always is a possibility. So when we're talking about how to minimize the costs, if the VRC is sent the claim, they will usually refer, they'll do their information and file review all before they call, and they should be contacting your examiner. And unless your examiner has asked them to work directly with you, they should be working through your examiner. And what will typically happen is once that contact is made, your examiner will probably be asking you, depending on what services or what referral was made, they may ask you for the worker's resume and job application. They may ask you for a job description for your worker's job of injury. And that is really to help you or help that vocational counselor put that job analysis together. They may ask if you even have a job analysis already done. If you've worked with vocational counselors before, I always think that using that at least as a basis, if you've got a prior job analysis, as a basis for the next person, then that's great. And all you need to do is a little bit of tweaking. That will save money rather than recreating the wheel and doing an entire new one. That your examiner will probably ask you about return to work options. If you haven't already brought that person back to light duty, where are we on that? Can we do that? How can they be of assistance if there isn't light duty right away? Why is that? And we don't like to hear that there isn't light duty available. So the biggest step you guys can do as employers is offering return to work as soon as possible. Ideally, when the injury happens, already have some light duty ready to go. So, we've got a couple different options: the temporary light duty, a permanent light duty, new job, job of injury. Let those things all be available, and that will always save you money, because often a vocational referral is triggered by somebody not working. So when we're talking about being creative with your light duty, usually I'm talking more specifically about the light duty, temporary or permanent. And a lot of employers don't recognize that their light duty that they may have available, it doesn't have to have anything to do with their regular job. I have had people that were window washers turn into door-to-door sales people, essentially. I've had them retrain people that they had this special skill set, and they would train the new people coming in, and you can do almost anything when it comes to light duty. So we want you to reach out to your examiners if you're having a hard time identifying what those things may be. Even if you can't offer full-time light duty, which of course, if their work pattern is full-time, we want you to match that. If you can't, part-time is certainly better than nothing. And one of the things that the vocational counselors look for is, like we were going over in the return to work priorities, is return to work. That is their goal. That is their big one. That's what they're hoping for, because all of the other stuff that follows, the transferable skills, assessing those, working through plan development and plan implementation, it's a lot of work for them. So return to work is the best option really for everybody. So, do you know the difference between formal and informal light duty? This is something that, in my experience, most employers don't know. And so when I was working in the early return to work program, I spent many, many, many hours explaining the difference between these and trying to help everybody through that. And for the workers too, they don't understand why they're being given a letter asking them to sign if they've already returned to work. So we'll go through kind of the light duty process, because that is something that if you guys weren't enrolled with us as your TPA, the vocational counselors would help you with, obviously at the billable rates. So when we're talking about light duty, you have two options: informal light duty and formal light duty. And so as you can see, the difference is that really what you've got is a light duty job description and a formal job offer letter. Those are the biggest things. So in informal light duty, which is on your right, no light duty job offer has been completed. Return to work can be facilitated based on the activity prescription form or some other return to work form a provider might write out. So for instance, if you have Bob who just got hurt and he went to the doctor and he came back and he brought you an activity prescription form, you say, great, I can have you do phone calls and filing and data entry and helping customers as they come in the door. That is no problem. Come back. You can start today. That would be informal. You got that APF that says they can do light duty, and there you go, and off they go and running, which is a great thing to do to start. That gets them back faster. It doesn't, you're preventing the deconditioning that may happen when they're not working, and you're preventing them from getting comfortable while collecting time loss. So it's a fantastic way to start. However, if that worker stops showing up to informal light duty, or they just tell you, nah, I'm not really interested in doing that, then they are still probably going to get time loss if they ask for it. If they're released to light duty, you haven't done anything formal, they're going to get the time loss payment. So always operate under that assumption that if we don't work on formalizing it, then they may at some point ask for time loss, and they will probably get it. So when we're doing the formal light duty, the light duty job description is completed, and then it's sent to the attending provider, the attending physician, to review and approve. And it has to be done. I often see the steps are a little bit out of order, but we'll get to that. So we put together a light duty job description, which your examiner can help you with, and we get that sent off to the attending physician. When we get that approval back, if it's approved without any modifications, you write up your job offer. If it's got some modifications there listed, maybe you wanted him to be able to drive around and pick up deliveries or something, pick up supplies for different job sites or locations that you might have, and maybe the driving is too much for that person physically, then you must decide if that's something that you can work with. And if you can, then we make the formal job offer letter with those modifications, just noting, yes, we can accommodate that. So you've got to do the formal job offer letter, and it's got to be all in writing in a letter, not an email, not a text, a formal letter. That must be obviously sent to the worker. If they have an attorney, a copy needs to be sent to the attorney. So the best part about doing the formal light duty is that should the worker decline the job offer, not respond, not show to the job, or quit, they would not be entitled to receive time loss payments. Now, there are some caveats with that, like there are in everything when it comes to workers' comp. But in theory, assuming their ability to work, meaning the doctor didn't change their restrictions and a few other things, they would not be entitled to receive time loss payments should they decline that formal job offer. And that's why you'll probably have had your examiners ask you about that all the time. Do you want to do the light duty job description? Is there one done? What can we do to help you? What about a formal job offer letter? And depending on your comfort level, your examiner can help you through that process as much or as little as you want. I certainly always recommend that if you're going to do the formal route, you kind of pass everything by your examiner so they can help make sure that it's within all of the policies and all the T's are crossed, I's dotted kind of thing. So here is a modified version of what L&I's form is for a typical job description. Now, the reality is the employers can submit a light duty job description form however they want, but usually this form is best and easiest because it encompasses everything that you need to have. The essential job duties, how many hours a day and how many days per week, the machinery, tools, equipment, and really the frequencies with which they'll be doing those physical demands on the left, with a little short description of what that means. What we have added was at the bottom, you'll see under the healthcare provider's use, if the hours per day, days per week, and effective date are left blank, we will proceed with the understanding the worker is able to perform the hours and days as listed at the top of the page. And really we do that because we often have where the providers don't fill any of that out. They say that there's approval. They say that they maybe they're approved for 40 hours a week, but they don't necessarily put in an effective date. We don't really just get to assume what that date is, unfortunately, even if they've dated it, and sometimes the claims managers will look at that and say, well, it's not valid because. Now, that's not strictly across the board, but it happens once in a while. So we try to give them all the tools that we can to make them say yes. We want this to be a yes. When you're doing these, like I said, your examiner can help you with this. Look them over to make sure they seem to be filled out appropriately, making sure sometimes even that they match the injury that somebody had. I worked with an employer when I was at L&I that she busted her ankle in several places and she could not stand all day. The light duty that the employer designed for her did not take any of her restrictions into account. They wanted her to stand and walk and push big carts full of stuff around a warehouse all day long. So your examiners will help you kind of make sure and conceptualize that is, one of those things that's appropriate for that injury and within their restrictions. You can do these forms before you know their restrictions. Some employers are under the belief that you have to have restrictions before you put these together. You don't. It's certainly helpful if you have some flexibility in terms of what you can offer, but it is certainly not required, and it is usually more beneficial the sooner you get this out the door to the doctor, the sooner you're probably going to get that worker back. So waiting for an activity prescription form or waiting several weeks for the next appointment is really costing money potentially, whether you're paying KOS or the person's collecting time loss payments. So, a question that I don't know if everybody knows, I run into this often. Can you offer light duty to a worker who moved out of the city, county, state, or country after they've been injured? And if you've ever had this, you probably know the answer, but the answer is absolutely you can and you should. So when you have a worker who has decided that, 3 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, a year after their injury, they're going to move away, that does not mean you cannot offer them a job. They will very likely, depending on where maybe they have moved, will turn it down, but that is great for you because they will not be collecting time loss. Now, just keep in mind, you recommending, you offer that just to do that is not beneficial because you have to actually have a job for them to come back to, so they may accept that job. But absolutely, you can and should offer that to them. So now we'll go over the do's and don'ts. So do offer light duty right away. We are going to be working on trying to help you guys. We're going to try to implement a whole return to work kind of process and packet. We'll be working on that over the next several months to make it a little easier for you guys to kind of just do as routine if you don't already. You can contact me or the lead or whoever your examiner might be to help identify the light duty options if you're having a hard time figuring out what you might be able to offer, or just if you have any questions, just reach out to us. Do complete the light duty job description, because obviously, as we talked about the formal process versus the informal process, it starts it right away. You already know then what they can do, what they can't do. But what it also does is it helps enable you guys to be eligible for the stay at work reimbursement. I'm not sure if you guys were in the recent training we did that talked about all of that, but that was really helpful. And if you're not sure, we can certainly, I believe there is a link available so that you can watch that again. And like I said, it begins that formal light duty process. Do offer light duty to all of your employees, even the ones you don't really want to, because those are probably going to be the ones that end up down the road in the ability to work assessment with a vocational counselor, possibly plan, possibly even a pension. So make sure you're offering light duty all the time if it's possible. Ensure that when you're formalizing your light duty, your steps are completed in the correct order. And what I mean by that is the light duty job description. Then it has to be approved by the doctor, and then you do your job offer letter. You cannot write a job offer letter without an approved light duty job description. I see that often where the job offer letter is done and expected to be a valid job offer because they wrote it, but that's not how it works. You have to do it in the correct steps. If you have employees who speak another language, usually it's guided by whatever they've marked on the report of accident. You as the employer are responsible for translating that letter into the person's preferred language. So the department typically will want an English copy and whatever their language is both done. And as the employer, that is your responsibility to get done. Unless your employee is already working in an informal light duty capacity, send the formal light duty job offer via certified mail. I always recommend you send it certified mail and regular mail. So don't send an incomplete light duty job description to the medical provider. That I see often, and I've got an example of what that looks like, I think, in the next slide or two. You cannot write a formal job offer letter based on an activity prescription form. It has to be a light duty job description that's approved. Don't forget to check in with your employee after they have appointments, after they started their light duty, all types. There's a bunch of different spots where it's really helpful because that helps you guys stay engaged with them and know what's going on. If they have concerns about the light duty, you guys may be able to edit it and change it before it becomes a big problem and they just get pulled off of all work. Don't omit information in the formal job offer that might seem unimportant to you or something they already know. Often that's the full location address that they're going to be doing the light duty at. That may be different than their normal place that they work. Their return to work date, so the date you expect them to report, and who that worker's supervisor will be. Those are usually the things that I see omitted. Here is a job description form that will say is less than complete. These are what I see happen quite a bit. This is not helpful because what it's missing is you have not given the doctor really any idea what that person is going to be doing. So how you say that they're going to sit frequently, but why? What tasks? What part of that job is? You know the job because you probably know the site that they're going to be at, but don't assume that the medical providers do. And I have had medical providers who have refused to sign these or disapproved them because they haven't been given a full picture of what that person is going to be expected to do. So filling these out is really, really helpful. And like I said, your examiners can help you with that. I can help you with that. Here is an example of a formal job offer letter. So as you can see, all of these parts and pieces, the date at the top should be the date the letter is actually mailed. And then you'll see that it says send certified and regular mail. You'll want to ask for a receipt requested, so you know that it's been signed for when that certified mail gets delivered. Then I would guess you're all probably familiar with these, but we certainly want to highlight those things that really need to be in there. That you got to put in the job title, you have to put in the date and time they need to report, the full physical address, your work schedule, and how many hours per week. Now, one thing that I always prefer, if you know it, to put in their exact work schedule. I know sometimes light duty can have a varied schedule, but some claims managers do prefer that the actual schedule that they work is put in these job offer letters. And because, you can't always determine who's going to be looking at this and judging it for its validity, I always recommend that you add as much information as possible. So you need to make sure you're documenting what their wages are going to be, their supervisor, a phone number for them to contact you. These are really important things. So we also have the sections for them to accept the job offer and not accept the job offer. So you have to send them in, and these are some of the components for the job offer. I wanted to write them out so you had them. And this is one of the biggest things I see in a job offer letter that makes it invalid immediately. If you do not provide that worker time to consider your job offer, it will be considered invalid. And what I mean by that is you have to put their return to work date 7 to 14 days from the date that letter is mailed. Because even if they're already working light duty, you are still legally required to give them the time to consider your offer. So if you are going to send a letter May 1st, you cannot ask them to report to light duty work on May 6th. You have not given them their 7 to 14 days. Doesn't mean they can't start sooner. It just means that you have to give them that time to consider it. And a lot of times workers, if they're already working, they're not typically going to stop and wait for that. They'll just sign it and off they go, and it's no big deal. But for those ones that maybe have some attendance issues or don't really want to work, you have to make sure that that consideration is given. You have to, as I noted before, advise the worker who to report problems to, include the approved job description, make sure the wages, hours per day, and that's why I have the work schedule highlighted, and the location of the work site. You have to note their healthcare benefits, that they'll continue if in place at the time of the injury. That didn't used to be something that was required. It is now. And if they're are collecting collective bargaining agreements to be considered, you have to note that information, and you have to make sure that a copy is sent to the attending physician, LNI, the attorney, and the vocational counselor. And your examiner can certainly help you with all of that. So the permanent work stuff, if you're going to do a permanent job offer, it's really essentially the same type of letter. You're just documenting that this is, expected to continue reasonably into the foreseeable future. But it has to match your employee's work pattern. So if they were 40 a week hour workers, then your permanent job offer must be as well. So we're just going to talk very briefly about stay at work. I only wanted to give you a vague overview because I'm sure you probably know what stay at work is, but like I said, if you don't, then there is another training that was done within the last couple weeks, I believe. So really what LNI is paying you to do is bring somebody back to light duty work, and they pay you up to $10,000, and you pick up to 66 days, and you get half of those wages that you were paying that worker back to you. So they will reimburse for special tools, clothing, or instructions that the worker might need to perform the light duty. So if you have more questions about that and how to become eligible, ask your examiner. We will help you apply for that excuse me, process and program. So what I've done is I've put up my contact information. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I know that there is a lot more information that can be provided in terms of voc services. You guys have probably had some interactions that you may have some questions about. I am more than happy to answer anything the best I can. If you've got any other questions about the training or feedback for it, feel free to email Amy. I really appreciate all your guys' time. I didn't see any questions pop up throughout this, so I hope it was helpful to you guys. Other than that, I really appreciate your time. We are at 11 o'clock right on the dot, so I will end it unless there's anything else. Okay, looks like we don't have any questions, so thank you guys, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.